When supporting Valenti's claim that the virginity movement sexualizes young girls, Valenti relies heavily on her already established ethos as a double author, as well as knowledgeable individual on and about feminist topics, as well as using logos to back up what she's claiming when discussing the targeted sexualization of young girls. In her third chapter, entitled Forever Young, Valenti writes, "The message is clear and dangerous. The most desirable women aren't even women at all. They're little girls." The quote is in reference to earlier in the chapter whereby Valenti discussed the targeted sexualization of toddlers, such as when underwear was sold at Walmart that said, "Who needs credit cards?" right on the front. Valenti would go on to say that the outrage following that was extremely healthy and well justified in any circumstance. However, there also needs to be a focus, Valenti claims, on how the problem is coming from multiple places, saying, "What is news, though, is how the sexualization is coming from someplace other than easy-to-blame, hypersexualized pop culture. It's coming from the virginity movement," saying, "From t-shirts like the one quoted above to abstinence classes to purity balls, or their father's pledge to their daughters at purity balls, saying, 'I, daughter's name, Father, choose before God to cover my daughter as her authority and protection in the area of purity. I will be pure in my own life, as a man, as a husband, as a father. I will be a man of integrity and accountability as I lead, guide, and pray over my daughter, and as a high priest in my own home. This covering will be used by God to influence for generations to come." As well as the quote, "After all, what's the difference really between a shirt sold at purity balls, a tight baby doll tee that says 'I'm waiting,' and the one recently pulled from Delia's that shouts in rainbow colors, 'I'm tight like spandex'? These shirts both announce the same thing, that the wearer is a virgin, and to sexualize them. Only one being mildly less vulgar than the other." And she continues with other statements like, "By focusing on the virginity of young women and girls, the movement is doing exactly what it purports to abhor, objectifying women and reducing them to their sexuality." Valenti requires the reader to remember what the virginity movement has made its claim and stake in trying to protect, and what it's been doing in reality, pointing out the hypocrisy of it all. Thereby, Valenti begs the question towards the readers: what is the motive of the virginity movement? Valenti relies on logos to help prove that sexualization of young girls is in part coming from the virginity movement, which is this weird amalgamation that is discussed in the earlier chapters. Citing a 2007 report with the American Psychological Association, the APA, found that nearly every form of media studied provided ample evidence of the sexualization of women, and that the most sexualization is focused on young women. The report also showed that the sexualization did not come from the media alone. Girls' relationships with their parents, educators, and even peers further contributed to the problem. Thereby, during Valenti's argument on the virginity movement's focus on the sexualization of young women, Valenti relied on both the ethos of herself and the virginity movement as we understand it, as well as logos to help back up what she is saying, and her claim that the virginity movement is sexualizing young girls. As well as, during this section, Valenti uses the dashes in her work to highlight a quick change between what is being perceived and what is reality. Take, for instance, the quote, "By focusing on the virginity of young women and girls, the movement is doing exactly what it purports to abhor, dash, objectifying young women and reducing them to their sexuality." By adding a dash, she is speeding up the conversation and bringing you quicker to her conclusion, while also showing the dichotomy of what the virginity movement hates, sexuality, and what it's doing, sexualizing. So lastly, I would like to focus on Valenti's argument that the virginity movement has been trying to regress women's rights, which she focuses heavily on in her 6th chapter entitled Legislating Sexuality. Valenti uses the movement's activity of trying to restrict a woman's right to an abortion, as decided upon by the Supreme Court that it is a right, as her jumping point into this conversation. Valenti starts with the tale of blogger Biting Beaver, who, when having sex, had the condom break on her. She frantically looked around to find a place to assumably get a Plan B pill, including pharmacies, hospitals, and local clinics. However, she was turned down every place she turned. Valenti writes, because of the refusal clause law, which exists in some form in 47 states nationwide, healthcare providers, including doctors, pharmacists, and nurses, can deny women access to medication procedures or even referrals if the provider morally objects to what is being asked of them. So, while telling and informing the reader of the injustice placed on women, jumping off from her example, she also brings it back and makes us feel bad. Thus, during the story, Valenti uses logos and pathos to establish what is happening to women around the country. Our author would also go on to list many other things that have been banned around the country to limit a woman's sexuality. Mandating a woman be married to receive welfare checks. A woman must be married to receive in vitro fertilization. And throw in banning vibrators as well, because that also happens. Now, because Valenti has established there's been an attack on women's sexuality, we move back to the abortion argument, the bigger rights in the issue. Writing, between 1997 and 2007, states enacted 557 anti-choice measures, 43 in 2007 alone. These include parental notification and consent laws, waiting periods, and even outright bans on abortions. Valenti talks about how this has had an overwhelming detrimental effect on women, saying, a woman in South Dakota who wants to get an abortion, for example, is subject to so many hurdles, geographical, financial, and legal, that getting an abortion is near impossible. The effect of these laws and what it's like to live in South Dakota is best exemplified by this story that you read. Stowes tells me the story of an 18-year-old living in western South Dakota who had an unplanned pregnancy. Because of financial constraints that prevented her from traveling all across the state to visit Planned Parenthood in eastern South Dakota, the young woman inserted a toothpick into her cervix in hopes that it would induce an abortion. After several days, she became afraid and called a local doctor to help her. The doctor informed her that removing the toothpick from her cervix might induce an abortion, and he refused to see her. These laws aren't just constricted strictly to legislating abortions. These laws have a slippery slope, as Valenti tells us that it's even dangerous for women who want kids, as failing to give birth to a healthy baby has resulted in a couple of these women being thrown in jail. These laws, ridiculously enough, have also resulted in the death of certain women, which is inherently a pathos argument. Citing a tale in her story, in the early 90s, in Washington, D.C., Angela Cater became critically sick with cancer. She was also 25 weeks pregnant. The hospital sought a court order forcing Cater to undergo a C-section, despite medical testimony claiming that it could kill her. The courts, however, privileged the fetus's life over Cater's, and she had to get an abortion. Cater's fetus, too underdeveloped to be viable, died within 2 hours. Cater died within 2 days. The C-section was cited as a contributing factor to her death. This is how Valenti makes her arguments. She uses her own ethos to get you to trust what she is saying. She uses logos to back up what she is saying, and she finally uses pathos to make you believe what she is saying. And to believe that what she's arguing against is a moral wrong and is inherently incorrect.